Okay, I'm going to do another landscape tutorial. This time I'm going to do lots of layers again of mountains, but unlike the most recent tutorial that I uploaded, where the colours were quite subdued, this one's going to push the colours to the absolute maximum really that you'd kind of want the colours to be. Who knows, by the end of this tutorial it might look a bit too garish too, but I'm going to do my best to use as vibrant a colour as possible without pushing it too far. Now, as usual, I'm using the app Procreate. The brushes I'm going to be using are mainly the soft brush, the medium brush. They're all set to the default setting, so I don't need to go into any of those other details. I've got an A4 canvas. I've got quite a lot of vivid colours that I'm going to use for this. The codes for these are down in the description. All you need to do is go to the value section, type them in here, and then start to piece together the colours. Now, there are quite a lot of colours. For those people that support me over at Patreon, there is a downloadable file for all these colours to save them the time of actually punching in the codes. But like I say, they are free down in the description anyway. If you do like to follow along with my tutorials and you create your own version, then please do share with me and with everyone else over at my Instagram page. You can tag me in your paintings. Also, I have a Facebook group as well that you can join and get feedback from myself and from everyone else there as well. All these links are down in the description, so feel free to check them out. Okay, with all that aside, let's get started. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flood this area of the canvas. I'm going to choose this colour. Now, it might seem a very strange colour to begin with, but there's going to be a real sense that there's a pinky hue permeating all of this painting. So I think to have that as a background colour is going to be quite useful. I'm going to create another layer, and then I'm going to go to my first blue, which is a light blue, and I'm going to use a soft airbrush. I'm going to turn the size of the brush to somewhere around 20%. I'm going to turn the opacity low to about 25. The problem with giving you an exact number with the opacity is I can press on lightly or I can press on hard, and it makes a big difference with the Apple Pencil pressure. So really the opacity, it doesn't make as much of a difference as perhaps the brush size. But anyway, I'm going to start putting in this blue towards the top, and I'm only pressing sort of quite gently really. If I want to build up that blue effect, I'm just going to go over it a few times. And I probably want to stop around here. In fact, I feel like I've gone too far with that, so I can just press the transform tool and make sure I'm on freeform, and that way I can just squish it up a little bit, and I'm happy with that. I'm going to perhaps just slope it down a little bit so it's not entirely straight across the canvas, maybe sloping down a little bit more on this side. I'm not going to change to another layer for this. I'm just going to use this slightly darker blue, and I'm going to turn the size of the brush down to around 10%, still on quite light, and I'm just going to feed some of this more vibrant darker blue, not too much, near the top corner. In fact, maybe the opacity is on too high for that now, so I'll turn that into the lower percentages of the opacity. I just really want to gently bring this stronger blue into the top of the sky, just to really emphasize the fact that it is blue, because it's not so obvious next to all that pink. I think I might even bring some of that blue down into this side here as well. I'm going to bring it down into this area. So I'm still pressing on lightly. If I pressed on more, it would really do it quite extreme, but I just want to do it by small increments, do it gradually. I can allow it to come to about halfway lightly, and then allow it to build up a little bit more on this side. I'm going to do the sun in this area, so it's going to be the warmer colours on that side compared to this side, but still I don't want to overdo it, maybe just a little bit there as well. Okay, I am going to create another layer now and go back to my colours, and you'll see I've got a couple of different types of purple. So we've got a real bluey purple and a much more kind of red, slightly darker toned purple as well. So I'm going to start with the bluey purple. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down for this part of the painting, keep the opacity low. I'm going to start adding some bands of cloud that just sweep through the kind of distant cloud area. So whenever you do clouds, it's perhaps important to realize that you're going to have some clouds that are really foreground and really stand out, but you might have a slight suggestion of clouds in the distance, maybe a different kind of texture, different type of cloud. These are going to be more stretched out, kind of wispier, and so that's what I'm aiming for here. I'm also going to start building in some lower lying clouds that are a bit more nearer to, and they are going to be condensing into a darker version now. So I can, without turning the opacity up, just start to create some sort of patchy, circular, still maybe at the bottom of the clouds they have a slight sweeping straighter edge, but then at the top part of these clouds they get a bit rounder, some more interesting shapes. Now it's important you do some of these things on different layers, because if I want to at a later point, I can go back to a layer underneath or add another layer underneath. And then if I want to just add some more pink into that area again, because I did remove a lot of it, I can put some of the pink back in and it won't overpaint on top of the clouds that I'm creating now. So I'm going to do some on both sides, just vaguely kind of scan to make sure it's on the same approximate level. And then above that, we're going to have perhaps turn the opacity up, have some larger sections here that are more closer to. So I've not got it on full opacity. If it started to do that, it would just look completely flat and dead. By keeping it on a relatively low opacity, I can build it up. It creates texture without too much effort. And I generally find that's the most efficient way of building it up. I can have some of these broken bits of cloud breaking up even more into bigger blobs across here perhaps. This isn't going to be the final look of them, it's just laying a kind of foundation texture, and then I can go over it with other colours. Maybe I'll just plot in the suggestion of some really clouds that are just going off the edge of this canvas here. Okay, so moving along my colours, I've got this darker, more reddy purple, and I can start to feed these into some of the areas as well, make some decisions about where some of these warmer colours should be. Perhaps they belong on some of the more closer to, but also the areas that are closer to the sun as well. I know I haven't put the sun in yet, but I'm going to, and it will make a lot more sense once I do. Now clouds, the kind of texture that you put in clouds are not easy to do straight away. So don't beat yourself up too much about it, over it, if it's not going quite as you'd like initially. It does take practice. I'm still on that learning curve myself. I feel like I'm fairly confident with a certain type of cloud, but then certain effects sometimes go right, sometimes they don't go right. It's just part of the process really, especially when it isn't a defined shape. It isn't a specific thing when you're drawing textured clouds. It is an effect that can go sometimes really easily and sometimes you really have to struggle through. So I've already got quite a lot of the pink that I did have here. So I'm going to move along to my yellowy orange colour. I will create another layer for this just in case it goes a bit wrong, and then I've got the option of removing it or changing the colour slightly. And I'm going to turn the size of the brush up a little bit and the opacity down. It is quite a strong orange, so I want to just start to piece this in gradually. In fact, what I might do with this layer is put it underneath my cloud layers. So just like I was explaining before, now I can add this orange and I know it's not going to change fundamentally the clouds that I've just added. In fact, I might just move that a little bit more down. I think I'm going to bring the sun down into around this area. So the great thing about digital work is that you can endlessly shift, modify. If you're not satisfied with the way that things are quite working, then you've got no excuse really to live with it. You can just keep on working into it and working into it, and really you've got every opportunity to get to the end result that you're looking for. I'm going to, on the same layer as this, go onto my pink colour, and perhaps at the top of the orange just add a bit more of the pink as well. And maybe I'll extend some of this pink in the background here as well. Not too much though. I feel like I've gone overboard there. Maybe in the upper part of this cloud here. Now if your clouds end up looking different than this, it's not a big deal. It might end up, looking better. It might be really interesting in a different way. So I just think it's perhaps useful for you to see the demonstration of how I'm constructing mine, and then you can take some elements of it, modify it as you choose, and hopefully you'll just learn from the general process of following along or attempting to use some of the general rules anyway. I think I might stick on this same layer, but I'm going to go to my brightest yellow colour, and it probably isn't going to be bright enough. I might have to use some pure white in this as well, but I'm going to put the sun somewhere in this region. Might turn the size of the brush down, but just plot it into this area, and I might even go to my disc where the colour is. If you double tap near the white, it goes straight to the absolute pure white, and maybe in the centre of my sun, reduce the size of the brush down a little bit. I can just really create a slightly smaller area in the middle of that light yellow, which is pure white. That's really going to help bring out the light in the scene, but it's not going to be enough on its own. I'm going to also have to go back to my yellow, and around the area of the sun, you would expect to see any cloud that is around the sun area to really pick up on that bright yellow, and bright white colours. So I'll turn the opacity up a little bit so you can see it's still in the lower area, and I'm still using the technique of building up gradually, lots of taps, and building up gradually. I find as soon as you put it on full opacity, it just becomes overpowering. You really want to do it gradually. Take the time, there is no rush. I presume you're doing this, if you are doing this, because you enjoy the process. So there's no need to rush to the finish line. Take your time, relax. Let's see if we can get this as good as we possibly can. You can use that light yellow, just maybe add some more of that brightness around the edge of the sun too. Turn the size of the brush really low, just in sort of 1 or 2%. And maybe there are really some direct, in fact turn the opacity way up as well. There are just some little bits of the cloud nearby that are really reflecting that light back. There might also be some wisps of cloud that extend across the scene too. So maybe I'll just turn the size of the brush up a little bit, have it dragging along a little bit too. I'll probably go back in here and use some of the purest white just to build up some of those white areas, but I want some of this bright yellow extended across this general area too. Okay, going to turn the opacity down, just generally create a kind of glow in the area really. So I'll turn the opacity down, I'm on a soft airbrush, I'm turning the brush up, and I can just spread some of that glow into the general area. And again, that's really going to sell the illusion that it's a luminescent, a light source. Now I can go back to this more orangey colour, turn the opacity up and the size of the brush down. Perhaps there's going to be some clouds that are just a bit more yellow on the yellow side, the orange side of things. Now I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to put this one on the very top, and I'm going to move along to this really vibrant colour. And it's so strong that I'm going to have to turn the opacity pretty low. And I'm going to use that now just to feed in some of this really exaggerated pinky purple colour into the scene. I'll turn the size of the brush down. I might just want 1 or 2 of these areas to really have that strong colour in there as well. Maybe it can blend into these ones and then cool off as it gets a little bit further away. So I'm going to have some low-lying wisps of cloud here that have picked up a lot of the vibrant colours from the sun, but have become a kind of different thing really. Like I said, I'm going to push the colours pretty far in this piece, trying to also keep it looking, if not 100% believable, at least sort of harmonious. So I'm going to let it sort of drift and fade away as it gets further towards there. Maybe these top clouds can have some of that colour in there as well, just going off the edge of the canvas. I'm going to go to my darker colour now. In fact, I've got a slightly darker pink. I'll use that first, and I'll use this just to make some of these clouds look a bit denser, a bit heavier, because I want the strongest pink to mainly be around the edges of these formations. And then as they get more towards the centre, I'm going to use that pink, and I'm going to use this end purple just to shut down some of that light effect, and it will give it a little bit more weight and emphasise the idea that it's glowing, but mainly on the wispy areas and mainly around the edges. So like I say, I can alternate between that darkest of the pinks and that purple. Turn the size of turn the opacity up to about 30% perhaps, just to really help darken up some of these areas of clouds, keep it quite broken still. So even when it's forming quite a solid looking blob, the way that I'm building it up is by pressing lightly and building it up gradually. Perhaps turn the size of the brush up if I want to just block in this area. You can always go back over it with different types of colours. Like I was saying, the great thing about digital is it's never really 100% a mistake. You can always fix it. Perhaps create some broken texture that's just breaking off from this section of cloud that you can barely see. It's just at the very top of the canvas, but perhaps it's just breaking off from there. And because it's away from this area, but it isn't really reflecting back as much of, or it isn't glowing with the pink colours quite in the same way. Perhaps I can use some of these pink colours to just go around some of the top edges of some of these clouds. If I find that it's too strong at times, perhaps I need to start with that lighter pink. can do that first, perhaps, that's more effective. And then I can use the other pink if I just want to build up the intensity a little bit, just mix the two together. So I'm using this pink and that pink at the moment to bring out some highlights along the top edges. Going around the edges of this cloud over here, make sure it has a pink edge that goes all the way around it. I can do the same with this one. Maybe extend that pink into some of this area underneath that big cloud as well. So just like the yellow starts to extend out here, maybe the pink drags and extends off. So I'm going to create another layer next, and I'm going to move on to the next part of my scene. I will come back to the sky and add loads more detail to it, but I feel at this point I need to just move on to another section. So I'm moving along to this first purple here. I'm going to turn the opacity to full and the size of the brush down. In fact, I've just changed to medium airbrush, so I'm moving down to a small size, around 3%. I've turned the opacity on full. Now it's going to look way too strong, but what I'm going to rely upon for this is the ability to use the opacity and turn it down so that I can find a level that it kind of fits correctly. So I'm going to use it just to create distant hills, mountains, as it sweeps across like that. And now what I can do is turn the size of the brush up and just fill that in a bit more, maybe press on a bit more lightly and just sort of blend it in there a little bit. You're not going to see a lot of this anyway, because as it comes down you can have other mountains there in the mix. Okay, that will do. I'm going to create another layer. Like I say, I'm going to go back to that and change the opacity and the levels to make sure it is looking correct, but I'm just going to keep whizzing along to another layer. Going to create another mountain range. Now in some places it's going to be almost exactly the same as the one above it. There's not going to be huge separation between the two. Like that. And similar again, I can just block in all the colours underneath it. Create another layer. Do similar again. Perhaps just have a slightly different feel for this layer. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my layers now. I'm going to go back to the first layer of the mountain range that I just created. And what I said I was going to do is change the opacity. So if you click on the N, you've got the opacity there. I can just turn it down to really soften it in so it seems to naturally blend in a little bit more. I've turned it down to about 40%. I'm going to do the same on the next layer. Let's turn it down, probably similarly to about 50, actually no, about 40% again, I think generally works. And I'm guessing that the last layer will be pretty similar, so we'll turn that down as well, something like that. Okay, so we'll keep on moving forward, we'll create another layer, and we'll go back to our colours. In fact, the colour that we're still on is going to look a lot darker next to those because they're all faded. So I'll do another layer on our new layer of that same colour. And then the next thing we're going to do is some much more foreground layers beyond that, in front of that I should say. That layer I think is a little bit too strong as well, so I'm going to turn the opacity back on that one, maybe a bit stronger on this one, keep it at 60%. Now I'm going to create another layer, and on this layer I'm moving along to this purple, or pinky purple, and again same brush settings except the opacity is going to be turned down to around 30% for this. I'm just going to start bringing in, this is a much more foreground, closer to set of mountains. So I don't care if it's a bit textured, it's not a problem. I might use that texture to my advantage and just have it fading out there a little bit, and then I can fill that in a little bit as well. I'm happy if it remains a bit more broken, a bit more textured. So on that layer, I'm just going to subdue it slightly to around 60%. I'm going to create yet another layer, turn the opacity of this layer up to max, or the opacity of the brush rather, up to max, and I'm going to create just a much more strong set of colours for this one, something like that. Can fill that in. And there's just two more areas I want to bring into the absolute foreground, so I'm going to create yet another layer. It's quite a lot of layers to this, but it's only an A4 canvas, so you should be able to manage with the number of layers absolutely fine. So I've got a rich, kind of reddy, dark reddy colour for this, which seems strange, but in the context it will work. And also I'm going to do a lot of tree texture over the top of this colour, so you won't really see much of this colour left by the end of it. Keep the brush relatively low. Again, it's still only about 3%. I'm going to create more rich, dark mountain here. And then I'm going to switch to my last colour, which I don't know whether you can see it, it is here. And again, I may as well create another layer. If you do find that for whatever reason you've run out of layers, you can always do some of these on the same layer. It's not so much of a big deal. So we've got a lot going on now in terms of layers. So we're going to have to go back into some of them and start to add some textures, some trees, that type of thing. So starting on perhaps a more distant layer, I think I'll go for this one rather than these two first. I'm going to go to my bottom row of colours and I'm going to go for these two end colours and this sandy kind of colour as well. I'll go for the light green first, and it's still very vibrant, which is why I have to turn the opacity really low. I'm still on the medium airbrush, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to reduce it down to about 2%. And what I'm going to start doing is just starting to build in blobs. I want to have lots of individual blobs that are going to be concentrating together to create a broken texture. So imagine that there's lots of layers of trees all en masse in this area. And then what we'll do also, like I said, we've got this sandy colour, and maybe for the top edge, especially when it's under this section here, turn the size of the brush down, and you might just get a hints of it here and there where it reflects more of the kind of light that's coming from the distance too. More so around the top edge, less so when it gets down in here because it's slightly more in the shadow. So you can literally just do it mainly in kind of like a scribbling motion. Do some more round blobs, some of them will stand out more, but it's important to leave some broken parts of the texture as well. We'll do the same for this area. Maybe turn the opacity really low for the green here and just do it nearer the edge where it's picking up the highlights from reflecting the sunlight. So alternate between the two colours here. Perhaps within the side of this mountain, it's not just going to be completely flat, perhaps it has peaks and troughs, so it might be along one of the peaks that you almost have a line seeming to come down from there as well. Now the green does seem quite vivid compared to everything else. It really does contrast with the purples, so maybe use this sandy colour to subdue it slightly. Maybe use a bit more of the sandy colour than the green, and then just go over it with a hint of the green just to pick out some of that colour a little bit more. Yeah, so maybe the sandy colour is a bit more useful, but like I say, alternate between the two and just bring out some of the green afterwards. You've even got a middle darker green there as well, just to change up the textures, especially as you come down to what would be more of a darker shadowed area. Let's just block it in, scribble in the area. Again, if I remind you, I'm on a really low opacity, so it is very time consuming this, but I think it's a better way of gaining the overall effect. If you want to speed the process up, you could turn the opacity up to around 20%, just start to piece them in a bit more quickly. If you don't mind a slightly rougher look for it, you can do that, but you will end up with something that probably looks slightly less refined. Just really depends on how much patience you've got to do it gradually. Now, typically with digital work, I've just noticed that I forgot to create another layer for this. It doesn't really matter. I may as well carry on keeping it on this layer. It's not going to make a significant difference to the process. If you wanted to have kept that on another layer, then that's absolutely fine as well. Like I say, sometimes if you are restricted with a number of layers, then you don't have to keep everything completely separate. It's just sometimes it's useful. Sometimes there will be techniques that I'll show you that do require separate layers, but this doesn't require too much of it. So I'm almost using the green just to block in the green effect. I'm using the sandy colour to create the texture. So I'm learning as I go along as well. Maybe turn the size of the brush up a little bit so I can speed up the process just a little bit. Block in some of the green. It's on a really low opacity still. And then go over it with the sandy colour. So this is a tutorial. It takes a lot more patience than some of my others. If you feel that you want a slightly simpler one to start with, there is a link up in the corner of the screen that is to my landscape playlists, and you'll probably find some simpler ones amongst those too. This is a more labor intensive or detailed version, but do make sure to check out my other ones, because you might find there's other ones are more suited to your patience or your skill level, whichever that is. It is important to add lots of little individual blobs, because every blob represents a tree. So if you don't do the blobs, it's just not going to give the impression that there's lots of trees. Okay, I'll come back to that, but I'm going to move on to some of the more foreground trees now. So I think I probably will create another layer this time, now that I've remembered. I'm actually going to move along to my other greens. So I'll do this one rather than that one. I'll do that one second to last. So I'm going to use this dark green, and I'm going to use the same process again. Perhaps turn the opacity up on this because it's against quite a dark background. And I'm going to use it to create a series of blobs. They're going to be bigger blobs this time because obviously it's closer to you. So what I'm really focused on, if I turn the opacity up, you'll see, is I'm trying to get the top edge of the tree shape really, because this part presumably would have more of a shadow area. So I'm not spending a long time on the detail, but I am trying to keep the general shape a little bit like this. It's a little bit almost like a scale kind of effect really, where you have almost this and then like that. But obviously I'm going to do it on a low opacity, so you barely really notice it, but you'll see the accumulative effect. So probably about 30% on the opacity is plenty. I think I might go back to this layer actually and use that black colour to create a section here perhaps that is more foreground as well, just while I'm thinking. And that way I'm going to do this as a slightly more distant area than these that connect at this point. So I can go back to the top layer and continue with that texture. Go back to my greens, I can change the green up a little bit. We don't want it all the same. I need to turn the opacity down to quite low again, and the brush size. In fact, I'm going to swap and change to a light green now. It's not the very lightest green, but it is pretty light. If I turn the opacity up, you can see along this edge, really going to help separate this area from that. I mean, there's a large darker tone anyway, but it should definitely have a highlight as well. I can even go to that very lightest colour, which is almost heading towards, if you look at this, it's a yellowy, almost orangey kind of colour, but when it's mixed with the greens, it becomes part of that general green colour. But obviously it's reflecting some of the colours coming from the sky too. I can go back to the greens here. So it really is like a stepping stone between this one and that one. So it's going to have some of that, and it's going to have some of the colours from there as well. So I'll go back to these colours too, use that lighter green, and it's also going to be suitable for some of these areas too. Again, I'm just going to switch greens again, perhaps go to this third green along. If it starts to appear like it's too much one type of green, switch and start to add something else into the mix. We want it very much like a patchwork of different trees, obviously, and therefore different types of green. I'm going to move back to this layer where I was working earlier. It is the one that had this particular detail. It is also, the area that contains that was by accident, but it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to move to that layer, and I'm going to move to these colors now. They are the most vibrant two colors, and they're really suitable for the absolute foreground trees. So I'm going to take my time a little bit more with these. They're going to be used to pick out the shapes, just the top edges of the shapes really. So it's almost like a silhouette in a sense, or more so like a silhouette than they appear here, but with a vibrant top edge of the canopy as well. I will use the other greens, but these two colours definitely are going to be a large part of the impact for these areas. Now when it comes down to here, it might be that the two areas of mountain trees kind of blend together. It's not obvious where one stops and the other one begins. Again, go to my most vibrant orangey-like colour at the end. Now, very much like the clouds, this is again a texture that will take practice. I think if you've got the right colours and you keep generally the right kind of shapes and you spend the time and patience to try and get it right, you're going to be relatively successful. But it does take time and it does take practice, and you will get better at this the more you continue to persevere through it. And you'll generally get a sense probably when something is working and when it's going a little bit further away from the desired look. I will use some of these greens in here for perhaps as it comes slightly away from that top edge, the greens become more subdued, or they're not picking up the light in quite the same way anyway. Perhaps turn the size of the brush up a little bit. As much as I do enjoy working in this type of detail, spending a long time on texture, I'm also aware that this is going to be one of my longer tutorials. So in the interest of trying to keep it as efficient as possible, I'm just going to perhaps just keep it a little bit more rough here in the foreground. When it comes to doing my own style, my own kind of really elaborate paintings, I can spend up to 60 hours on a particular piece of work. I mean, it almost has no limit. And then I combine things together and then they become something new. So the combined time for some of my paintings must be over 100 hours. I don't know. I lose track completely of the time scale that I spend on these. But for the sake of these tutorials, I'm trying to keep them really as simple as possible to create a nice effect. I want to make it, strip it down to its basics really is the intent behind them. Again, switch through the different greens. Don't be restricted to the two end ones by any means. Move back to one of the earlier greens perhaps, change it up a little bit, and they're all similar-ish, but just because you've used one type of green in one area doesn't mean it can't also be used in a different area. So really just try and create different types of green, makes more interesting texture that way. Keep flicking between them all, and hopefully you'll get the best result that way. Okay, I might come back to these, add some pine trees, some extra features to make, you know, the variety of trees look a bit more varied. But I'm just going to do some detail now working on these mountains because they were fine when I was placing them initially, but they do need a little bit of work. So I'm going to go back through my layers now to identify the area that I want. So I'm going to work on this layer. So I'm going to go to the colour here and long press it, go to my colours. Now I'm going to just nudge it only slightly in the direction of the black. Now I moved it very slightly. Now you notice I've got a lot of colours here to begin with. So what I really don't want to do is have 100 different colours and there's no space for them anyway. But I've just nudged it slightly darker. So if I go back to my colour, I'll show you again. I'm going to long press and then I'm going to nudge it. In fact, I'll take it a bit further. So it's not black by a long way, but it's definitely a darker version of it. And what I'm going to do is turn the opacity down. I'm going to put it back on my soft airbrush perhaps, turn the size of the brush down and the opacity down. And I'm going to use this now just to go along the top edge of that mountain area. And just really, I want to create a slightly sharper detail along the top edge of it. Now I'm just focusing it really at the edge initially, so I can create some broken texture, some sweeping movements that seem to help describe the shapes. So just like you might have an area here where it's undulating on the sides, you might get it here, so you get some area where it's lighter and then it dips down into like more of a trough on the side, and it rises up for a peak and then into another sweeping kind of trough as well. So again, I'm going to move across, picking out a darker tone along the edge, maybe of it sweeping down that texture. Maybe I'll extend it over here a little bit as well. Now I can do exactly the same process now. So I'll go to the next layer further back. I'll go onto that layer, go to my color disc and just nudge it to a slightly darker version of it. I don't want to do too much, but just a little bit. Turn the opacity down and it's going to get really hardly any difference at the top of this one, because these are the ones that are foreground. You really notice the changes between light and dark and these ones. As soon as you get a little bit further back, there really isn't much of a difference. So if you press on and you make it too dark, it's going to look just, too much. I'm just ever so slightly along that top edge, just making it a little bit darker, not much at all. perhaps in this area, because it isn't flooded by warm light in the same way. You'll notice that variety of tone a little bit more, so you can make the top edges here a little bit darker, make those sweeping bits a bit more exaggerated. I'm going to do the same, move back a layer, go to the layer, just double check which it is again. Okay, so we're on that layer, press and hold, go to your colour disc, nudge it just a little bit darker, and again, just use it, certainly in this area anyway, less so in there, but use it in this area just to perhaps add a little bit of texture, a little bit of noise so it isn't quite so flat, redefine that top edge. Now I'm going to approach the next layer in a slightly different way. So I'm going to go on that layer and I'm going to select, just zoom in, the colour that's the distant mountain there. And I'm going to use that then to perhaps at the bottom area of it, just break up that a little bit, especially in the kind of dip there. So it's almost like there's a mist at the bottom of that now. And then a little bit as it comes along here, maybe a little bit less there and less there. And to be fair, I think it's a nice effect. I might even start to use that on the next layer down and maybe just a little bit on the next layer down as well. So it's quite a nice effect. You don't want to go overboard with it, but it just helps create a little bit of a sense of mist at the bottom of that. I can always go back a layer and I can do the same in the next layer perhaps, just a little bit. Don't overdo it, that aspect. I could even do it on the next layer beyond that, back here, just a little bit. Where were we now? I'm getting confused with the layers. I didn't want that layer, did I? No. I wanted back the other way is what I meant. So it was this layer and just a little bit of that mist at the bottom of that. And that's something you can apply all over really. If you're using a lighter colour like this and you think that you want to add more mist and separation between all the layers without even changing the layers, especially if you go to one of the more foreground layers, let's say for this one, anything you add to this now will go over the whole image, so you can add this lighter tone to create a sense of mist. So what I'm going to do now is create another layer and it's going to go on top of everything else, and I'm going to use this strong pink again. I'm going to put the opacity, so it's this pink rather, opacity really low, maybe 1 or 2%, size the brush up to about 7%. Check that I'm on the soft airbrush, and what I'm going to do is start putting in some of that pink into this general area. I just want to create a slight, if that's too much, I'm going to turn the opacity down to, because it's such a vivid colour, down to 1%. And I just want to maybe just create an area around here where I'm feeding some more of that pink colour in and it's coming down into the whole scene. It's like it's creating a halo of that strong pink colour into the whole area. I think it's by doing effects like that, because I'll just show you now, if I turn that off, you can see that it then becomes almost like very separate areas. As soon as you click it back on, it feels like it integrates the different areas a little bit better. I'm going to continue working on that very same layer. I'm going to go up to my sky colours. I'm going to work with this bluey colour and this purpley colour. So they're both purpley, but one's more of a bluey purple. Turn the opacity up now because we need to see it a little bit more clearly. I'm going to be using this colour to add some of the really low-lying clouds now, so they're going to be almost undistinguishable from the actual distant mountains too. So they'll kind of blend in together at certain areas. Very similar colours. So another thing that I feel I need to do is go to this very lightest blue and perhaps just work into areas here. So what I'm imagining really is like a strong area where you've got the pinky orange colours, but then a break and you see some of the light blue sky beyond that. So yeah, I want more of a distinction between the blue area and this orange area. I think it will work better. I'm going to go to my darkest purple colour, and this is where I'm really going to start to pick out some of the real dark colours in these clouds now. So maybe I need to turn the opacity down a little bit. I'll go back now to my layer underneath, which had the brightest colours. So we're talking about this brightest yellow. I'm going to use that a little bit more. So I'm going to use it along the bottom edge of this most distant mountain range. Maybe extend some of it a little bit further over this way as well. I'm going to turn the opacity up quite a lot. Just really want to exaggerate some of these highlights a little bit more now. I think as you go along, you get a little bit more confident and you think, okay, that's working, but I want to push it even further. I think when you start out initially, you just want to get the vague sense of it in place. And if you go too full on to begin with, then really it's very easy to overdo the effect. So you get the general sense and see, is it generally looking right? And then you can go back over it and push it a bit further as and when necessary. So I'm pushing these highlights even further now that I'm convinced that it is working. Maybe some tufts up here, maybe that's too strong. Yeah, maybe some tufts up here, some little broken bits that are not quite in the red spectrum. Turn the opacity down, maybe I can add some more of it in this whole general area, lighten up even further. Back to my colours, back to my strong pink. I think I'm going to use this slightly on that yellow layer as well. So it's going to be underneath, it's too strong in fact. It's a really strong colour this, so let's use it sparingly. Sometimes when you decide you want to use a colour, you know, you're going to use it in different ways. Like some colours I might use at full opacity, and then other times I pick a colour and think, yes, that's the colour I want. But then when I actually start to place it in, I find it's a really overpowering colour, so I have to dial it back a little bit. And that's just the way it goes. Now this is underneath these cloud layers, so it's having slightly less of an impact, but in a good way. So it's having its impact, but it's not quite as overpowering. It's kind of generally creeping in around the edges, which is exactly what I want really. If I was to start playing with that color on top again and doing the same thing, it very quickly overpowers. So that's not really what I want. So yeah, again, I'm using it on that layer, just to start to increase its impact on the scene without going too far, hopefully. So I'm on 1% now. I'm just going to start adding it into this bank of cloud. So the mix of the yellow with this colour is going to probably make it a little bit more orangey in actual fact, but it's just going to then hopefully blend this extreme version of it in with that a little bit better, so it doesn't look quite as jarring as it perhaps does, or did. Going to go back to the very top layer again, just because I'm going to be adding this darker blue again. Working on really fine details at this point, but you will notice I'm not zooming in, because although I'm working on the finer details, I'm trying to get still a general kind of impressionistic effect. So it's not going to be absolutely every little leaf on every tree defined clearly, or even every tree or every tiny texture in the cloud really. It's something that if I was doing just for my own pleasure rather than as a tutorial, I might do that and take it to the nth degree, but for the sake of the tutorial and time really predominantly, I'm just trying to keep it a little bit simpler. And I'm just using it really lightly to add some even more distant layers of cloud there, perhaps filling in this area. In fact, I think it's too strong a colour, so I'll go back to my purpley colour here, which is the fourth colour in. I think I'm going to close up this area a little bit more, perhaps turn the size of the brush up to about 3%. Still on relatively low opacity. I'm just going to shut down some of the light in this area. Feels like it's still a little bit too light there. In fact, I'm going to take a nearby colour, and this is the way that I work all the time. Sometimes it's impossible to have every single colour that you need, but if there's a local colour that you want more of, just press and hold, and then I'm going to use that now to blend in this area. So the land and the sky kind of start to merge together a little bit more than they do currently. And I'm going to go to this side of the painting and do something similar. I'm going to select that section, turn the size of the brush down and the opacity up, and I'm just going to perhaps tidy up this bit of the mountain range. It feels a little bit clumsy over in that area. And that's generally the way that I will work. It doesn't tend to be pre-planned out. I just, you know, you adjust and you modify and you attend to things as and when they crop up as you go along. It might be that I like that particular colour there, and I think that would work really well for an area of cloud in the sky, and that's the way it works really. You have to start to trust your judgment a little bit more. I know that takes time and building up confidence, but that's generally the way that you want to be headed anyway. I do feel that I'm going to go back to the sun layer. In fact, no one, I'll create another layer and I'll put it on the very top, because I want this now to be perhaps the most important layer for creating the effect. So I am going to go over the sun. I'm going to make that whiter, so I can go to my yellow and perhaps just, yeah, I'll just go to white. Turn the opacity up, and I'm just going to reclaim that sun because I feel like it's getting a little bit lost. Maybe turn the size of the brush up, reclaim that sun, go back to this yellow again, turn the opacity down, just build that up around it a little bit more. And what I'm going to do, with a low opacity on that yellow, so I'm going to turn it down to about 2%. I'm still on the soft airbrush. I'm going to turn it to about 3% on that. And I'm just going to bring in, I'll start to almost the suggestion that you've got rays of light coming out from there. So just 1 or 2 to begin with. It's important you do this extremely gradually, because if you really went into it like this, it's just going to look ridiculous. So you want it like 1 or 2% really, and then you're not pressing on fully. You're doing it very gradually. In fact, I think I could even warm that colour up a little bit more. So I'll go to this pink colour and I'll bring some of that pink in with that same effect. So they're all pointing towards the sun. The sun is the source of light, obviously, and the sun rays are coming from there outwards. And they can extend maybe a bit more into the scene too. It's going to be mainly in this area. I'll just show you the impact that already can have with and without. I'm not going to extend that effect over there really. I could extend it upwards, but I don't think the pink would be appropriate for the top section. So I'm going to move along to the orange as well. I'm also going to use this to mix with that pink and extend that into this section a little bit more. Specifically when it points downwards, I would say, directly towards you. If you feel like you've got almost too much of a concentration of that colour there, go to your light, yellow again, and then just lighten that section up perhaps. I feel like that orange is it's almost like a too dark orange actually, so let's go back a little bit more. I feel like I've overdone the orange there a little bit. Maybe the orange is better in this area where it's already darker, so the orange isn't going to look dark next to it. Maybe go to my light yellow again, turn the brush size to about 4, turn the opacity up to maybe like 2%, and then I can do some of those beams up at the top this time, going upwards into the sky. Again, don't go too far with this. It's only a slight hint of it is really quite powerful. It's almost like you don't notice it in actual fact. If you notice it straight away, then it's probably too much. You'll notice when I take that effect away, but if I hadn't pointed it out the first time you look at it, perhaps you wouldn't have even seen it. So the general effect is there now. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just refining. So for example, like I said earlier, I'm going on to this foreground layer now. I'm going to go to my darkest colour that I have here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time adding details. For example, turn this size of the brush down and the opacity up. I could add things like little pine trees perhaps that stick up in the mix. So different types of trees that just stick out, a bit more variety than we currently have. I think that the type of trees that we've been showing so far, or I've shown so far, make the general landscape look a little bit too samey. So by adding a couple of extra little bits like that, extra features that stand out as being a little bit different, I think it just generally improves the scene. I'm going to go to the layer above it, that way I can add more trees over the top of it. I realise my layers are a little bit out of sorts. With these last kind of details, you could do this on an entire separate layer just at the very top of everything. It's just a fine tuning at this point, so you could do it on an entirely separate layer. Doesn't really matter. Perhaps go back to this colour here. It's not quite as dark as the bottom colour. A bit more suitable for adding these trees into this area of my scene. I'm going to go back through my colours now, start to just pick out some of the highlights, some of the textures. Like I say, just fine tuning. Other than this, the overall effect is pretty much there, but I'm just going to spend a bit longer just improving what we have. I'm even going to use that sandy colour or that yellowy colour, orangey colour from the top, and I'm going to use that as well. Because we used it in such a lot of that area, I'm going to use it to really bring out these details. I can even use this orangey colour now to even almost create some separation between those areas there, so create an extra layer too. You can do a lot of really good stuff just with highlights. Okay, I'm going to leave this one here at this point. If you found this one of my more challenging tutorials, then do make sure to check through my playlist. There are simpler ones. There's probably a different kind of landscape to cater for most different ability levels, so check through them thoroughly. Make sure to subscribe, press the bell notification button, and I shall catch you back here soon.